We are now joined by John Bolton, former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. Mr. Bolton, welcome. You served in Donald Trump's administration in the White House, but after leaving, you've been more than a vocal critic of the re-elected President of the United States. What do you predict Donald Trump's foreign policy will look like in his second term?
Well, I'm very worried about what he may do. He has already said he wants to begin by imposing 10%, 20% tariffs on all imports into the United States. It's questionable whether he has the statutory authority to do that, but if he went ahead and did it anyway, it could crash the American economy and maybe the global economy. He's said that he wants to resolve the Ukraine war by getting Zelensky and Putin in a room where they resolve it in 24 hours. That's ridiculous. That isn't going to happen. But my fear is that if they fail to reach a deal, certainly it wouldn't be Trump's fault. It would be Zelensky's fault. And he and Putin would reach an agreement to the war, which would obviously be very disadvantageous for Ukraine. We see this problem of lack of attention, lack of national security philosophy, strategy, policy, really across the board. That's the way Trump is. That's the way he was in the first term. There's every reason to think that's the way he'll be in a second term.
Donald Trump has promised he would solve the Russia-Ukraine war in just one day. You mentioned this issue. Does that mean he'll pick up the phone tomorrow and call Vladimir Putin? Do you think this actually can happen?
That's possible. I think it may be more likely that Putin calls Trump. And I envision the conversation going something like this. Donald, I'm so glad you were elected president. This guy Biden doesn't know what he's doing. We've got so many problems now. You and I can solve them. We don't need aides around. You and I will get together. We'll solve the problem. I think the same sort of scenario might work out with Xi Jinping of China. These leaders have dealt with Trump. They know him. They know how to flatter him. They know how to work on his vulnerabilities. And I think, especially in Putin's case, feel confident that they can get what they want from him on issues like Ukraine. So the sooner they speak to Trump from their perspective, for well or ill, the better off they are.
So, Mr. Bolton, am I right in understanding that Donald Trump would be willing to hand over those Ukrainian territories currently occupied by Russian forces? What else might happen? Some have suggested that Trump would pressure Kiev for such a deal, threatening to cut off weapons supplies to Ukraine if they refuse. Do you believe that this is how his conversation with Volodymyr Zelensky would go, and what are the consequences of such a deal? I can imagine Vladimir Putin seeing vast opportunities for further aggressive wars if such an agreement was reached.
Yeah, I think it could be something like that. I mean, J.D. Vance said during the campaign that his idea of a solution to Ukraine was that Russia keeps the territory it now holds. You create a demilitarized zone between the Ukrainian and Russian lines. I suppose that means along the other existing Russian-Ukraine border. And Ukraine agrees not to go into NATO. The only problem with that deal for the Kremlin was Putin thinking to himself, I could have asked for more. I could have gotten more from them. And so, I don't think Vance would have proposed that unless he thought one way or another that it would be acceptable to Trump. It's a very disturbing sign. I think people ought to be quite concerned about what Trump would do here. I'm also very concerned that Trump may withdraw from NATO. He threatened to do it in 2018. He came very close to doing it. He's never fully understood what a collective defense organization is. And I think he could withdraw at some point during a second term, which would obviously also have a catastrophic effect on our aid to Ukraine.
Just recently, Emmanuel Macron, president of France, posted on Twitter or X, saying Europe must unite, forming a strong, self-reliant bloc without relying on the USA. Does this mean the world is changing so radically that America's alliances with NATO partners and other Western allies could begin to collapse?
Look, the French haven't liked NATO since Charles de Gaulle was president. They've dreamed of this independent EU force. They don't like being second fiddle to anybody. Well, fine. If a European government wants to destroy NATO, just go ahead and say they're going to create an independent force. And France can lead Europe in self-defense against Russia and other potential adversaries. This is what infuriates Americans. Trump will take advantage of it. This is assisting on the short road to Trump's withdrawal from NATO.
From what I understand, Trump has strong support in Israel. What do you think will happen with the war in the Middle East?
Well, I think Trump there has said he wants the Middle East conflict resolved by the time he takes office, which is a reflection that he views Middle East, Ukraine really as Biden wars. He just assumed not have to deal with them at all. So I think in the transition period between Election Day yesterday and inauguration on January the 20th, which is also sometimes an uneasy period because people don't really appreciate we only have one president at a time. There could be a lot of risks and threats to the United States. But I think also for some governments, the opportunity to take advantage of the transition might apply here to Israel. That Prime Minister Netanyahu could decide this is the time to take out the Iranian nuclear weapons program. I don't think Trump would have any difficulty with that. I think that's actually the right thing to do. It should have been done long ago.
That suggests, Mr. Bolton, a near-term prospect of an escalating Middle East conflict, a direct Iran-Israel war, with other participants joining. Isn't this, to put it mildly, highly explosive?
Well, I think Iran is a paper tiger at this point. I think they're very worried about Israel's capabilities. The S-300 air defense systems that Russia supplied to Iran have all been destroyed, at least according to reports we have from Israel and in the press, which means all of the targets, their oil targets, their nuclear targets, their ballistic missile targets, their military formations are vulnerable to Israel. And I'm not sure at some point here, Iran just lacks the capability to undertake a wider war. And I think the threat that is posed worldwide by Iran becoming a nuclear power is of sufficient danger, sufficiently grave that it really would fully justify Israel taking action. I don't know that that's what they're going to do. I'm simply suggesting in the transition period, even before Trump takes office, that may be a moment of opportunity for the Israeli government.
One last very brief question. How would you describe Donald Trump as president of the United States? What kind of president is he?
Well, I like to say, as I did in my book, that working inside the White House in his first term was like living inside a pinball machine. It's not an orderly consideration of deep policy questions. I thought that, like every president before him, Donald Trump would be disciplined by the gravity of his responsibility and the enormous potential consequences of his decisions in national security affairs. But I found, to my dismay and amazement, nothing disciplines Donald Trump. It's like a random walk through foreign policy. It was in the first term. I think it will be in the second term.